This podcast is sponsored by Vicon, the Academy Award-winning developer of motion capture products and services for the life sciences, entertainment, and engineering industries. Vicon provides cutting-edge hardware and software with industry-leading accuracy. Shogun, Vicon's visual effects software developed specifically for the VFX community, captures performances effortlessly in real time and delivers robust, accurate, reliable data. Find out more at www.vicon.com. Hi, my name is Victoria Atkin, and you're listening to the Performance Capture Podcast. Today we have an amazing director on board, and I'm going to let him introduce himself to you. Please tell us your name, where you grew up, and your professional title.
My name is Aladino Debert. I'm originally from Argentina, from Buenos Aires. And I'm a director and visual effects supervisor at a company called Digital Domain.
Very nice. And you've had many years of experience in this field. So I would really love to hear how you would describe what performance capture is to everybody out there that's completely confused about what that even is, what that means. And you can define, if you would like, the difference between facial capture and motion capture. But the umbrella term of performance capture, what is it to you?
Well, what is it to me? That's a good question. What is it to me is a way for me to be able to work directly with actors and drive characters that don't exist otherwise. I like that you separate the facial from the motion. And, it used to be that it was just motion capture, of course, because we didn't have the technology to capture faces. But now that we do, it's becoming more and more of a performance capture. So from a layman's term, you already described it. But for me, it's a way to work with actors.
Mm-hmm. And how did you discover performance capture? How did you get into it? What was your first gig? Did you stumble across it like most of us?
A little bit, yeah. It's an interesting story. So I think that my first job was in 2006, and we were doing a campaign for Target. And the project was that we had all these CG characters that were made out of items that you can buy at Target.
Okay.
And they were dancing, and this was this whole thing, right? So we partnered with a choreographer that actually ended up being I think he was famous already, but his name was Travis Payne, and he was the choreographer for Michael Jackson.
Oh, wow.
So he was a big deal. And we, he brought in like 6 or 7 dancers and performers, and that was the first time. I mean, I knew what obviously motion capture was because I've been in the industry for longer than that, but that was the first time that I was involved in a project. And it was eye-opening because I sort of come from animation a little bit, so I had never been, I was never involved in a project that I could literally work with a choreographer. He would direct his dancers, and I could see the characters that were designing on screen. So it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And kind of a day-to-day thing for you. You say you do visual effects and performance capture. Can you explain a little bit more about that and kind of?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I like my title sort of, gives up a little bit. I sort of wear 2 hats depending on the job. So I'm a director for the commercial side of Digital Domain. We have a production company called Mothership, and that's sort of how I direct through. But I'm also a visual effects supervisor. And depending on, under that role, I essentially run the visual effects for shows and commercials as well. Motion capture, performance capture comes in both ways because, for instance, if I'm directing a project that is, let's say, full CG, I do a lot of cinematics for video games and stuff like that. That's obviously a natural way of directing actors that would end up writing or driving CG characters. But even as a visual effects supervisor, even if I'm not directing anything specific, there's times in which, for instance, we use performance capture to get either blocking of characters or even for previous, reasons. Even when we have something complex that, kind of humanoid type of performance, because we have a capture studio or a stage at my job, we can literally dress up and go and capture something very quickly, end up with animation that would take maybe a few days to do it otherwise. So
you use it as an enhancement tool as well?
Oh, heck yeah.
Yeah. And you've worked on some huge titles. Do you want to tell everybody some of the things?
There's a few posters that I saw. Yeah, I mean, because I direct a lot of cinematics. I mean, I've done Call of Duty, Halo, Destiny, Battleborn, Evolve. I mean, I don't know. So many of those.
And you've worked on the visual effects and the performance capture for these things,
absolutely.
right? Because you and I worked on the Call of Duty trailer.
Call of Duty, exactly. Yeah, so it's interesting that you sort of separate it. For me, it's one and the same. I mean, performance capture it's a tool that allows me to do visual effects for a piece.
Okay, all right.
Right. Whether that piece is a like video game cinematic or a commercial, or even if I use it as a storytelling technique in order to create visual effects for something else. For instance, on my more kind of visual effects supervisor side, I work a lot on TV shows, and when we have character animation, needs on those shows. I mean, if it's not a matter of like booking the studio, but again, because we have a motion capture studio at work.
Yeah.
So we sort of use that a lot because it's a lifesaver. Because for two different reasons. First, a time, for a time reason, because you can go and get performances really quickly. But also for me as a director, I rather work with a human as an actor and kind of be able to work with that person kind of directly and ask him or her what I want and then see it and then know that ends up being, captured for a character, than, which I've done a lot, acted it myself and try to get the animator to understand what I want, So it's a fantastic tool. And obviously as it gets more and more sophisticated, going back to that 2006 project that I did, we could get the body motions and performances, but of course we couldn't get any faces, right? Now, I'm not saying that you can capture 100% fidelity of a human face, but we're getting really close. And not only we're getting really close, but we're really getting really close to seeing it in real time. So as a director, as an artist that needs to get a human, performance into the screen, it's a priceless tool.
Yeah, and please let us know what's some of the titles that you've worked on, because I think, was it Thanos that you've
Well, yeah. So we did Thanos for the two Avengers movies. That's probably the most famous one.
And you did the performance capture and to enhance the visual effects that you were working on. That.
So Josh Brolin, who played Thanos. We worked with him for many months. This is actually a good side story. So that sort of goes into how sophisticated it's gotten. When we did before we got the project, we had gotten the project based on we were trying to do a test to get the show, and so Josh came into the studio, and he wanted to see how, and you as an actor will understand this, how much he needed to overact in order to drive the character, right? So we did a test. And again, because of the techniques that we're using, and it's gotten so fine and so sophisticated that he was just mind blown by how little he needed, how little he needed to do. I mean, he could just be himself. And he said afterwards that he sort of changed his plan on how to play the character based on that test that we did, because it was very, very subtle.
It's very filmic.
It's very filmic. And I think that in the first Avengers, the one that came last year, simply because the character was written that way, it was a bit more subtle and more like it was a lot in his eyes. And I thought that it was the best, and it's not just because we did it. Honestly, I thought that it was the best performance capture I have seen of a face. Granted, it's almost human. You get away a little bit because it's still purple and he's still, he still has like a weird shape. But if you look at, from the nose up and you just look at the eyes, I thought it was the most kind of faithful, transfer of a performance that I have seen on a character.
It's incredible. I mean, and also you're being very picky because you've been looking at it for anybody else.
Of course, but that's because we do it all the time, right?
Yeah.
Like for instance, going back to your Call of Duty stuff. It depends on what you're trying to do. Sometimes, getting 80% of an actor into a character, it's more than what you need. You know what I mean? And then you plus it up with animation, hand animation and effects and whatever. But when your character is so dependent on emotion, having a very faithful way to capture performance is essential. Now, I'm not saying that we're 100% there. I mean, I think there's still time to go. But I think that the combination of super high fidelity cameras with real-time rendering and AI, because I think AI, artificial intelligence, it's sort of helping us, and it was used in Thanos, is helping us bridge a little bit of the difference between what we can capture and what the real actor looked like. I think between those three things, in a few years, it'll be really difficult to tell the difference.
Yeah. And so we've talked about how you first got started with your Target commercial and these things, and now gone on to Avengers and all these awesome things. What is your favorite thing about motion capture? Why do you think you've said how useful it is as a tool, but what's your favorite thing being on that performance capture stage?
Before that, I'm going to have it. I didn't supervise Thanos, so I don't want to take credit for that.
No, we were.
That was Kelly Port, and but I work in the same company, and
Okay.
and we benefit from the same techniques and that were developed for that. For me, it's, again, I see computer graphics. I have a long story, but I came from architecture into computer graphics and animation, and for me, the technology that allows us to do the visual effects that we do today are tools. They're not any worse or better than a hammer, right? Like, it's a good hammer. If you have a nail and what you need is a hammer, it's a great hammer. Like, performance capture allows me and allows us to transfer what actors do best into a character on the screen. So for me, it's simply a very, very good way of doing that.
Okay.
If there was a better way, I would be using a better way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Obviously, and that's, of course, when you're trying to do something that is human. If you want to try, human mean, like, you're using an actor as your source. Obviously, there's reasons in which you don't want to do that. If you want to do something like, Pixar type of animation that is much more stylized, there's sometimes no reason to do that, although they still do faces, right? But a lot of the work that I do tends to be, again, game cinematics, performance, type, kind of performance-driven character work for video games and the like, in which, we tend to try to do it as photorealistic as we can. So performance capture, not only body, but obviously, as much as we can from the faces, is essential to try to get us to the point in which you look at a character and you go like, oh, wow, that looks real. Or, to be honest with you, better yet, the moment when you don't think that what you're looking at is anything other than an actor, that's when I'll know
you
that
hit the sweet spot, and that's the
when
favorite
we'll know.
moment. Yeah.
We're not there yet. We're there. We can get away with it when they don't talk. Like, there's times
until they open their mouth, and
until they open their mouth, and boom, and the eyes and mouth.
We're getting there, though. So can you tell us an experience that you enjoyed on the motion capture stage? Something that maybe stood out for you, or funny, or I don't know.
There's many funny ones. There's one time, let me think when, maybe like.
Because seeing actors in Lycra all day long, it's always going to be fun.
It's always funny because, again, they're spandex suits full of little dots, So it's interesting when you get to work with actors that are not self-conscious about it, because they're already weird and their faces are full of dots and they have a camera in front of their nose. But I was directing this spot for a video game that never saw the light of day. But it was kind of a spin-off of, I don't remember, some soldier thing, World War II thing. Anyway, so it was a comedic take on some World War II thing, which to begin with is not that comedic. So I'm not surprised it didn't saw the light of day. But there were some German soldiers versus some, Western soldiers. And the end of the spot had this guy who's sitting on a toilet.
Okay.
So it's a German Nazi officer reading the paper, sitting on a toilet. So you just have to imagine that. So we prepped, a couple of Apple boxes, boxes so he could sit. And of course, we gave him, a newspaper to read. So what was funny is that we could not get it to do it without cracking up. So it was, so it took us a long time. The only thing he needed to do really was sit on the toilet, which was his box, and read the newspaper and say Scheiße, which is, ... in German. But it took us, even though it was the simplest take of the entire day, it probably took us like 5 minutes because the guy was cracking up and then everybody would crack up, and it was a really kind of memorable thing. I actually have some pictures of him sitting on the toilet with his legs crossed.
That's hilarious. Oh my goodness. Yeah, the things we do, been talking about.
different things. And and you stand in these spandex suits. I mean, you're the only people that look glamorous. The directors get to wear whatever they want.
Although I've wore the
suit?
I've done it. Yeah.
Oh, you went method.
I went all method. Yeah, because I don't know. I think that many directors were kind of sort of frustrated actors, and in some place, and I can't remember the project, but I wanted to. I wanted to block a lot of animation, and what I was talking to you about before, that it sort of sidesteps things. So I put the suit and I acted a bunch of things, and.
I think we need some pictures of this and some video evidence. I would like to see this. So that's I like that though. I feel like you got in there with us.
Yeah,
man. So what advice would you give to other people listening to this that want to get into a similar field of performance capture? I know we've already had some response from other directors that maybe are TV and film directors that want to move into performance capture. And also people that are just starting out, maybe they're leaving film school, or they want to study film, or they want to study video games or visual effects and use it using performance capture. Where would they start?
That's a good question. I mean, again, I think that what you have to think of performance capture is it a tool? It's a means to an end. You can't think of it as a standalone, silver bullet to anything. Just like when you're doing any film, if you don't have a good story, you end up with a crappy movie, right? So performance capture allows you to do something that you could do before, but better. So to me, it all depends on whether, if you want to get into as an actor, well, I think the best thing you can do is, try to find ways not to be too self-conscious about it, but most actors are not to begin with. So,
What are you saying about us?
I'm married to one, so I know. As a filmmaker or someone who wants to get into visual effects, I can't talk too much from your side of it, but from my side of it is just be aware of just the. In other words, what you don't want to get is too enamored with the technicality of it all. Because the technicality and the techniques and the science behind it changes constantly. So even though conceptually it's still the same as it was 20 years ago, especially when it comes to facial performance capture, it's gotten so sophisticated, and it continues to get so sophisticated by the month that what you have to be able to do is sort of take a step back and look at it as, well, what can it do for me as a filmmaker today, and what can it do for me in a year if the technology continues to advance in the way that everybody thinks is advancing. So, in order to get into it, I remember, I've worked with people that started as literally having done tests, kind of character animation tests by hand, and then showing it to performance captures and say, look, this is what I want to do. I would love to find a way to get involved in this, And I've ended up working with artists that started as interns on motion capture or motion performance, studios. And again, as a filmmaker, I think that what you have to do is grab, the idea of performance captures and put on your toolbox, and you take it out when your piece requires it. I use it a lot simply because I do a lot of game cinematics, right? So if you're in anything related to, especially video games, if you're going to be in the production of video games, they use it, 10 hours a day. So it all depends on what you're interested on.
Do they need an agent, or would you say reaching out to different people? How do you get your work? You've obviously now developed a huge body of work. How did you get started? Was it curiosity? Was it just knocking on the doors and...
Well, I guess it depends on what you're asking. If related to performance capture or to the industry as a whole, because
I guess the industry as a whole, and then moving into this field specifically.
Right. Well, industry as a whole. Well, I studied computer graphics in school in New York, and millions of people that studied computer graphics or film or anything like that, I put together a reel, I put together a portfolio, and I went out and I started knocking on doors.
Yeah.
The advantage that I had is that, and I'm going to date myself here, is that I sort of started in the industry when it was still a bit of a Wild West, 25 years ago or so.
Yeah.
So it was a little easier to get in simply because there was not enough, there weren't enough artists going around. So, but what I did is essentially, I used computer graphics to put together a reel of the pieces that I would have. I have a tip. So what I did is I created some pieces of the type of work that I would have liked to work if I actually had a job.
Okay, great. That's good though.
Do you know what I mean?
That's law of attraction.
Yeah. So it's, I did my best, and that was sort of my last year in school. I designed a few commercial spots, like a little fake spots, whatever you want to call it, projects. And I did it on the lab with help with from my teachers and, colleagues and stuff. And then that was my reel. So there were I think I had 3 or 4 spec spots, all in CG.
That you just used people from school and you directed and you made something that...
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what I ended up, sort of doing. With that, I went out and started looking for jobs. But that's the reason I'm telling you this is because 15 years later, or so, or maybe 10 years later, when I started to get into directing, I had the experience of, once again, not getting the kinds of jobs that I wanted because, the usual catch-22, right? It's
yeah. The same with acting,
Of course, you can convince sometimes the client that you can do that if you haven't done it before. And, so what I did is I put together a spec spot. I'm into cars, so it was a car spot. And
he has a great Instagram with cars. I just have to put that on there. Completely adjacent.
It's my other,
but yeah, I love
passion.
cars too.
And what I did is I created it because I had more experience by then. Is I did a deck, I put a pitch together, and I sold it to my bosses.
Yep.
And I said, we need more of this type of work. I need more of this type of work. Let me do it. It was a matter of I was trying to convince them to let me use the resources that we had in the studio. So it was a bit of a labor of love. It took me maybe 8 months because I had to do it around my real job, so to speak. But then with that, I was able to sort of catapult my directing career because not only I was able to show, well, if you gave me a job like that, I could do this.
But that's a really great tip. I think that's good for anybody listening, whether producing, directing, acting, to just get something that you want to do, kind of put it out there before it's manifested.
Yeah, and I think that applies to essentially any artistic endeavor. I've been writing a feature screenplay, and I'm sort of in trying to finish it. And this is the first time that I try to write a feature, and I've been trying. I've been working with writers my entire career, but I never tried to do it on my own. And one of the biggest advices that I've gotten from, let's call them real writers, is write.
Just
you want to write,
write. Yeah.
So you want to direct.
I love that.
You know what I mean? If for instance,
you want to act.
Yeah. My oldest son is about to go to film school, and what everybody tells him, and I tell him, is you want to be a director, start directing. Yep. Sure, school is going to give you experience, is going to give you contacts, is going to give you access to techniques, and you're going to learn tools and all those things, right? But what is not necessarily going to tell you is, well, what do I do with all this stuff? Yeah. You know what I mean? And the only way to get better at it is by doing it.
Exactly.
Well,
that is awesome advice. I honestly know it's what we need to be doing, and we can all get caught up in contacts and marketing and social media, but really just get down back to the craft and make it happen. So I want to thank you. We have a little gift for you from Vicon.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you get these lovely Vicon sunglasses.
Oh, right on. Thank you.
Keep them for you, and a notepad. There we go. So you can make all your directing notes, and then a nice T-shirt for them for their 35th anniversary.
Excellent.
So there you go. Thank you, Vicon, for sponsoring this podcast today, and thank you so much, Aladino, for coming on and sharing your amazing knowledge of this industry.
My pleasure.
We're very privileged to have you on here.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This recording was done by Famosa Interactive, a full-service post-production sound company. Among its many divisions, Famosa Group as a whole offers independent and AAA content creators end-to-end services, including voiceover, sound supervision, sound design, editorial, mixing and music for gaming, film, broadcast, and other platforms. Visit www.famosagroup.com for more information.